We're going to start this week with a review of Book 2, The Sieve and the Sand. I had you read that last week because it's fairly short, kind of in contrast to Book 1 and Book 3. And so we'll be doing a review, and then the rest of the week we'll be looking at Book 3 in quite a bit of detail. But Book 2 is by no means inconsequential. It's actually one of the most significant books in the text because it's really where a lot of the philosophy of the book is explained and developed. And so I have a presentation, and I'll be flipping back and forth between the present mode and kind of not, because I don't want to cover up some of the essential information with my picture. So let's get started with the central image of the sieve and the sand. He is going to explain it in these quotes. It's sort of a reflection from his childhood, and he remembers that a cousin had once promised him, if you can fill up this sieve with sand, I'll give you a dime. So in his childhood way, he was trying to fill it up. And he says the faster he poured, the faster it sifted through with a hot whispering. His hands were tired, the sand was boiling, the sieve was empty. Seated there in the midst of July without a sound, he felt the tears move down his cheeks. And then he continues, if you read fast and you read it all, maybe some of the sand would stay in the sieve. But he read and the words fell through, and he thought, in a few hours there will be Beatty, and here will be me, handing this over. So no phrase must escape me. Each line must be memorized. I will myself to do it. And so it's sort of this race against time. He knows he has to turn in the Bible or the book to Beatty that evening. And he's trying to memorize and grasp and download as much of it as he possibly can. So you get this sense of urgency in this chapter, a sense that something has to be done. And so kind of the accompanying question with that first thematic element is, what is dissipating faster than you can keep up with? The frenzy of a race against time or against the inevitable? And I know, like, at your ages, you do experience this, whether it's the sense that, like, oh, my childhood, like, I'm already almost a senior. Where did the time go? I have to decide on a college. I have to take the SAT. I have to start working on X, Y, or Z, and I'm about to leave home in about a year from now. It's this race against time or a race against the inevitable. Maybe it's, wow, the end of the quarter is coming and I have done nothing and I have all of this work to do and now I'm stressed. It's a human fate, human condition that we will always have certain things that inevitably come and we cannot grasp them. Now, the sense of urgency that we feel towards certain things is a little bit lessened when we look at the significance of what it is that he is trying to grasp, which is knowledge and like the truths of this book that are going to be taken from him in just a couple of hours. So just that's one of the themes, is the sieve, and it's also a symbol because it stands for something else. All right, so the Bible is another symbol in this chapter. Why is it that the book he saved is the Bible? What is it about the Bible that is significant? And I think my image might be covering some of the words, so we're just going to look at it like this. It could have been any book at all. Why the Bible? What is important about that? Well, the Bible, obviously, as we know, being Christians or coming from a Christian school, like, you should understand that the Bible is the source of truth. And what is it that he is grasping for? He's grasping for truth to try to figure out and find answers. And it's irony that puts the Bible in his hand. The one book that holds the source of truth, the one book that holds answers, is the one book that is slipping through his fingers in a matter of moments or a matter of hours. But interestingly enough, what do we learn about the truth that comes from this text? So Faber, as he's talking about it, he says, I'm not a religious man, but he continues and he says, Lord, how they've changed it. In our parlors these days, so like on our TV screens, Christ is just one of the family now. I often wonder if God recognizes his own son the way we've dressed him up, or is it dressed him down? He's a regular peppermint stick now, all sugar crystal and saccharin, when he isn't making veiled references to certain commercial products that every worshiper absolutely needs. Um, so again, what it's noting is that culturally speaking, and this was written in the 1950s, again in the height of sort of cultural Christianity, you kind of dress up for church on Sunday and then the rest of your life is lived apart from him. And basically what he's saying is Christ, Jesus, God have become just accompaniments to our everyday lives as sort of like conversation pieces, or, oh yeah, like I know who God is, oh Jesus, I read the Bible, that sort of thing. But what he says is that God probably wouldn't even recognize the way that we have dressed Jesus up. If you go back, I've been studying the book of Amos with Patrick and just some of the minor prophets. Jesus, God, like they are intense, powerful, like omnipotent beings with like majesty that is beyond our comprehension. And yet he's dressed down in our culture. He's friend Jesus. He's Jesus who's there to meet all of my needs. He's there to make my life better because oddly enough, rather than us being there to serve and honor and worship God, he's there to serve and honor and worship us in the way that our sort of cultural messages and even the worship songs that we sing, God is there to meet all of my needs and to make my life completely better when I'm feeling depressed and sad and lonely and aching. And yes, true, Christ is love, God is love, but not in the way that we make him subservient to us and our will. So that's something to think about. How has Jesus been changed, and is he recognizable or a far cry from his biblical form? He continues to move then from the Bible to talk about books in general as symbolic elements. So he says, in his frustrated tone, he's saying, we have everything, we need to be happy, but we aren't happy. Isn't that the cry of our culture? Something's missing. I looked around. The only thing I positively knew that was gone were the books that I'd burned in 10 or 12 years. So I thought books might help. And how does Faber respond? It's not books you need. It's some of the things that were once in the books. Books were only one type of a receptacle where we stored a lot of things we were afraid that we might forget. There's nothing magical in them at all. The magic is only in what books say, how they stitch the patches of the universe together into one garment for us. There's no way that we as a society in one lifetime can possibly think the thoughts of millennia. We can't ask the questions, wonder about human nature, put together the pieces of philosophy and science and inquiry about justice and hope in our own little pea brain in the amount of time that we have between somewhere around 18 and 70. And so what he's basically saying is that books aren't magic, but they represent thoughts and ideas that people have lived through, that people have vetted, that people have, like, we've lived this before. We've lived the vices of materialism already. Generations have lived the vices of materialism. Generations have lived the vices of dumbing down Christianity. Generations have lived through the vices of alcoholism and meaninglessness and depression. And where do we find their answers? In books, in the Bible, in things that have been written down for us to preserve and go back to so that we can learn from them and move forward. And yet we don't. We live it again. And we turn to our mode of distraction, our mode of numbing to find the answers or to avoid the answers that other people have died for. So, he continues, there are 3 things that books preserve. One is quality. And what does the word quality mean? He answers. To me, it means texture. This book has pores, it has features. This book can go under the microscope. You'd find life under the glass, streaming past in infinite profusion. The more pores, the more truthfully recorded details of life per square inch you can get on a sheet of paper, the more literary you are. That is my definition anyway. Telling detail, fresh detail. The good writers touch life often. The mediocre ones, they run a quick hand over her, and the bad ones rape her and leave her for the flies. So, what in our world, as we're reading this, preserves quality? That sort of lasting, remarkable detail that requires us to savor and return to something and be with it? Or are we just into the cheap, fast fashion? Are we into the Instagram pic or the Snapchat that goes away in 24 hours? Are we in for the cheap one-night stand or the, I don't know, the temporary hormonal rush and satisfaction that viewing pornography is? All of these things are meant to be temporary. They are not quality. They are not lasting. We are grasping at things that do not last and do not matter. And it wasn't any different in this culture. He says the second thing they lack is leisure. And Guy responds, off hours? I have plenty of those. And he says, no, it's not off hours that I'm after, but time to think. If you're not driving 100 miles an hour at a clip where you can't think of anything else but the danger, then you're playing a game or sitting in some room where you can't argue with the four-wall televisor. Why? Because the television, the televisor, the cell phone, it's real because it's immediate. It has dimension. It tells you what to think, and it blasts it in. It must be right. It seems so right. It rushes you on so quickly to its own conclusions that your mind doesn't have time to protest. What nonsense. Do you have time to even process the things that you are ingesting by the second from hundreds of other sources? He also says, well, my wife says books aren't real. Thank God for that, says Faber. You can shut them. You can say, hold on a moment. You can play God to it. But who has ever torn himself from the claw that encloses you? When you drop a seed in a TV parlor, it grows you any shape it wishes. It's an environment as real as the world. It becomes, and it is truth for far too many people. Books can be beaten down with reason. But with all my knowledge and skepticism, I have never been able to argue with 100-piece symphony orchestra, full color, 3-dimension, and I being in and a part of those incredible parlors. As you see, my parlor is nothing but 4 plaster walls. And here, he held out small rubber plugs for my ears when I ride the subway jets. Where and how do you silence the noise and the dominance of the world to determine and ponder truth? Or does it play God to you and shape you or become your sense of truth? Does it tell you what to think? Does it blast in? And it must be right because it seems right and rush on you so quickly that your mind doesn't have time to protest. And the third thing he says that books provide is a sense of autonomy, the right to carry out actions that we learn from quality observation and thinking on truth. So once you've observed something that's quality and you know the difference between quality and temporary, and then after you've had time to think critically about it, you need to act. And he says books are there to remind us what fools we are. They're Caesar's Puritan guard whispering as the parade roars down the avenue, remember Caesar, thou art mortal. You may think you are a god, you may think you are indestructible, but you are not. The things you're looking for, Montag, they're out in the world, but the only way the average chap is ever going to see 90% of them is in a book. And it raises the question, because of media, because of things being televised and popularized, that there's these promises that we can become and we can accomplish and we can attain and we can master that are exaggerated because of media. You can become a professional athlete. You can get into Harvard. You can get into Stanford. You can achieve whatever it is that you wish to achieve, the love of your life, because people do it all the time in movies or in, that we see, hear a story on television. But the point is, these leave a person with the human boundary of disillusionment. They remind us the fact that we live in a world of delusion. And so our failure then calls us to encounter the real world with all of its limitations. And that's disappointing. but that's truth.